People in Ash Hollow used to say the old station only waited for one thing, someone lonely enough to hear it breathe. The first snow of November came early to northern Montana, soft and slow, covering the forgotten railroad town of Ash Hollow in a silence so complete it felt borrowed from another century. Rusted tracks disappeared beneath white drifts, telephone poles leaned tired against the gray sky, and the old train depot at the edge of town stood exactly where time had abandoned it. Weathered cedar walls bent beneath decades of cold winters and lonely winds. No trains had passed through there since 1966, though some folks still swore they heard a whistle now and then, low and distant, usually around 2:17 in the morning when the valley turned still enough to hear old memories moving through the dark. Ethan Calloway pulled his truck onto the frozen gravel road just after sunset, the engine coughing once before settling into silence. 40 years old and built with the quiet strength of a man who had carried heavier things than he ever spoke about, Ethan sat for a moment with both hands resting against the steering wheel, staring at the building ahead. He had been called many things once: Navy SEAL, team leader, survivor. But lately, most days, he felt more like a man wandering between places that no longer recognized him. The divorce papers had finalized 8 months earlier. His old house in Virginia belonged to someone else now. The service was years behind him, though some nights it still lingered in the shape of restless dreams and silences too heavy to explain. When he saw an abandoned train depot listed online for $10, forgotten by the county and too damaged for developers to care about, he bought it without asking many questions. Maybe because broken places felt familiar. Maybe because he wanted somewhere quiet enough to stop remembering for a while. Beside him in the passenger seat, Ranger lifted his head. The German shepherd's amber eyes stayed fixed on the depot, ears tall and alert beneath the dim wash of twilight. At 6 years old, Ranger had long since retired from military detection work, but instinct still lived deep inside him. He knew how to notice things people missed. Tiny shifts, strange sounds, silences that felt wrong. Ethan rubbed the dog's neck gently. "Looks worse than the pictures, huh, buddy?" Ranger didn't move. Outside, wind slipped through the valley carrying the faint scent of pine, frozen earth, and something older beneath it, something metallic that lingered in the cold air like forgotten machinery sleeping underground. Ethan stepped out, boots crunching over brittle ice. The station looked larger up close. A cracked sign barely clung above the entrance. Ash Hollow Depot. Several letters had fallen away long ago. One of the windows was boarded. Another reflected the dying sky like tired glass remembering better days. Somewhere overhead, loose metal shifted softly in the wind. The sound reminded Ethan of ships groaning against steel docks overseas, back when nights carried orders and purpose instead of uncertainty. Ranger climbed down from the truck slowly. Usually calm after long drives, tonight something about him felt different. Focused, alert. His nose twitched sharply once, then again. Without warning, he moved ahead of Ethan, crossing the snow-covered platform toward the station entrance. "Easy," Ethan called, adjusting the strap of his duffel bag. But Ranger had already stopped near the center of the depot floor, just inside the doorway. The room smelled faintly of dust, cold wood, and years left untouched. Old benches sat crooked beneath broken windows. A faded departure board still hung near the ceiling, frozen on routes no longer running. Above them, an enormous clock had stopped permanently at 2:17. Ranger stood completely still beneath it. Then slowly, very slowly, he lowered his head toward the floorboards. His body stiffened. One ear twitched. A quiet sound rose deep from his chest. Not fear, not warning, something stranger. Recognition. Before Ethan could say a word, Ranger lifted one paw and scratched twice against the old wooden floor. Then he stepped back. Beneath the silence of the station, something answered. A soft metallic knock echoed from somewhere below. The sound came again, softer this time, as if the station itself had cleared its throat after 60 winters of silence. Ethan stood motionless beneath the frozen clock, eyes narrowing toward the floor, while Ranger remained perfectly still, muscles tight beneath his silver-gray coat. Another faint knock echoed somewhere below the old boards, slow and hollow, metal against metal, then nothing. Just wind brushing against broken windows and the distant hush of snow falling over empty tracks. Ethan crouched carefully, resting one gloved hand against the floor where Ranger had scratched. The wood felt cold enough to sting through leather. Solid. Old. Dust settled into the grain like forgotten years. Probably pipes, he muttered, though even to himself the explanation sounded weak. The building had not carried water in decades. Ranger lowered his head again, nose hovering inches above the same spot. His ears twitched once toward the darkness near the ticket counter, then back to the floor. Whatever had his attention had not left. Ethan exhaled slowly and stood. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We figure it out tomorrow." Outside, the Montana evening deepened into blue-gray darkness. The valley disappeared behind drifting snow, swallowing fences, roads, and distances until the world seemed reduced to only three things: the depot, the old tracks, and the quiet between them. Ethan carried supplies from the truck one load at a time. A duffel bag, a folding cot, 2 lanterns, a small propane heater he hoped still worked. He had lived in worse places before. Much worse. A temporary shelter after a flood in Louisiana once had no walls on one side. During deployment, comfort had meant dry socks and enough coffee to stay awake another hour. Still, something about the station unsettled him in ways he could not explain. Maybe it was the silence. Not ordinary silence, but the kind that felt aware of itself. The kind that made small sounds feel larger than they should. The creak of timber. The hiss of cold wind beneath old doors. Ranger pacing slowly across the room, as if mapping invisible boundaries no one else could see. Ethan lit a lantern near the wall and unpacked with the steady rhythm of habit. Precision had survived long after military life ended. Boots lined neatly beside the cot. Flashlight near reach. Thermos beside the chair. Ranger's blanket spread near the old potbelly stove, though the rusted thing looked more decorative than useful now. While unpacking, Ethan noticed something strange above the ticket window. A row of photographs hung crookedly along the wall, faded nearly white with age. Train conductors, families posing beside railcars, winter festivals from another era. In one photograph, taken sometime in the early 1960s, the station looked alive. Men in wool coats stood smiling beside a polished passenger train, while children held paper tickets near the platform. At the edge of the picture stood a tall man in a dark stationmaster uniform. Stern expression, silver pocket watch. Behind him, the depot clock read exactly 2:17. Ethan stared longer than he meant to. Something about the man's face felt familiar, though he could not place why. Ranger suddenly stood. Not alarmed. Focused. He walked toward the far wall near the abandoned baggage room and stopped. One slow step, then another. His tail lowered slightly. Ethan followed. "What is it, boy?" Ranger sniffed along the cracked baseboards, then paused beneath an old electrical panel layered in rust. He looked back once at Ethan, ears raised, amber eyes strangely intent. Then came a faint sound neither of them had heard before. Somewhere deep in the building, hidden beneath wood and stone, a soft mechanical click echoed through the station, followed by the distant hum of something waking up. The sound vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving behind the kind of stillness that made Ethan question whether he had imagined it at all. He stood in the center of the baggage room, lantern glow trembling softly across old wood walls, while Ranger remained near the rusted electrical panel, perfectly alert. Snow tapped gently against the depot windows now, soft grains carried sideways by the wind, and somewhere far beyond the valley, thunder rolled so faintly it sounded more like memory than weather. Ethan waited another minute. Then another. Nothing moved. No second click. No hidden machinery groaning back to life. Just cold settling deeper into the station like an old guest refusing to leave. "All right," he said quietly, mostly to himself. "No ghosts tonight." Ranger glanced toward him, but did not move. Ethan had learned long ago that the dog trusted instinct more than reassurance. Back during service, Ranger had once stopped outside a collapsed building while everyone else kept walking. 30 minutes later, engineers found unstable support beams ready to give way. Since then, Ethan had stopped dismissing the pauses, the stares, the strange moments when the dog simply knew something was off. Still, exhaustion weighed heavier than curiosity tonight. The drive from Idaho had taken nearly 14 hours, and sleep had not come easy these past few years anyway. He checked the locks on the depot doors, though most looked symbolic at best, old iron latches hanging crooked after decades of winters. Then he sat near the lantern with a can of soup warming slowly on a portable burner, steam rising in pale ribbons toward the rafters. Ranger finally moved, though not toward his blanket. Instead, the dog settled near the station entrance, facing inward as though standing quiet watch over the room. Outside, the valley darkened completely. Snow erased the tracks inch by inch until they looked less like railroads and more like scars disappearing beneath time. Ethan ate slowly, eyes drifting back toward the frozen station clock. 2:17. Something about that number kept catching his attention. Too deliberate somehow. Too exact. He remembered the old photograph upstairs. Same time. Same clock position. 60 years frozen in place. His phone had no signal inside the depot, but after climbing onto an old bench near the ticket window, he caught 1 week bar long enough to search the station online. Results were sparse. Mostly local rumors buried in forgotten forums. One article from nearly 10 years ago mentioned the depot briefly after a proposal to tear it down had failed. Another mentioned a train line closure in 1966 after unexplained logistical complications. Nothing useful. Then, buried in a grainy historical archive, Ethan found something stranger. A black and white newspaper clipping dated December 17, 1966. Head station manager missing after winter storm. The article was short, almost suspiciously brief. Walter Boone, age 52. Last seen working overnight during severe weather conditions. Search efforts unsuccessful. Investigation closed without explanation. Ethan frowned. No explanation rarely meant no story. It usually meant someone stopped asking questions. Ranger stood suddenly. One smooth movement. Ears raised. Tail still. Ethan looked up immediately. What is it? The dog turned toward the front windows, staring into the dark snowfall outside. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Ethan heard it. Faint. So faint he almost dismissed it. A distant train whistle drifting through the valley, low and mournful, carried on the wind like something that had lost its way decades ago. Ethan rose slowly, pulse quickening despite himself. No trains had run through Ash Hollow since 1966. Yet somehow, beneath the weight of fresh snow and forgotten years, the sound came again. Longer this time. Closer. Ranger let out one low breath through his nose, then walked toward the depot entrance as if he already knew exactly where it had come from. The wind outside had changed. Ethan could feel it before he even reached the door. The way cold slipped differently through the cracks of the depot, thinner somehow, sharper, carrying with it a sound that did not belong to an empty valley. Ranger stood near the entrance, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. His ears remained pointed toward the darkness beyond the snow-covered platform, every muscle tuned to something Ethan still could not fully hear. Then the whistle came again, drifting through the night like an old memory carried too far by winter air. Long low, almost sorrowful. Ethan pulled his coat tighter and opened the station door. Cold rushed in immediately, carrying the scent of pine sap, iron, and snow fresh enough to silence the world. The tracks stretched into darkness beneath silver moonlight, disappearing beyond frost-covered trees where the valley narrowed between hills. No lights, no movement, no train, just quiet. Yet somehow, the sound had felt real enough to stir something old inside him, something restless. During service, instincts often arrive before understanding. You learn to trust tension before explanation. Ranger stepped onto the platform slowly, paused silent against weathered wood dusted in snow. He stopped near the edge where passengers once boarded trains 60 years earlier. His head tilted slightly, nose lifting toward the frozen tracks. Ethan watched him carefully. You hear something I do not? He asked softly. Ranger remained still for several seconds. Then suddenly he turned away from the tracks altogether and faced the depot instead. Not outside. Inside. Ethan frowned. You have got to be kidding me. Before he could take another step, a light flickered behind one of the station windows. He froze. It lasted only a second. A pale amber glow near the old ticket office, faint but unmistakable, like a lantern shifting somewhere deep inside the building. Then darkness swallowed it again. Ethan stared hard, pulse steady but alert now. He knew what exhaustion looked like, knew how lack of sleep played tricks on tired minds. But he had not imagined that. Ranger had seen it too. The dog was already moving back toward the entrance, pace deliberate, focused. Inside, the station felt colder than before. Not colder in temperature exactly, colder in mood. The lantern Ethan left near the folding cot still glowed steadily where he had placed it. Nothing disturbed, nothing missing. Yet the air carried a strange stillness now, almost expectant. Ranger bypassed the main room entirely and walked toward the old waiting area near the ticket counter. He paused beneath the wall of photographs again, then lowered his head. Ethan followed, crouching beside him. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Dust, old wood, cracks spreading through faded floorboards. Then something caught his attention beneath the bench near the wall. A thin line carved into the wood floor, almost invisible beneath dirt and age. Too straight to be natural, too deliberate to ignore. Ethan brushed away years of dust with his sleeve. A rectangle slowly emerged in the lantern light. Narrow, hidden, a seam built into the floor itself. Ranger gave one quiet huff through his nose, then scratched lightly beside the edge. Not frantic, certain. Ethan reached down and tested the boards carefully. Solid, locked somehow. But there, barely visible beneath decades of grime, sat a small metal keyhole blackened with rust. He sat back slowly. Well, he murmured, glancing toward the frozen station clock overhead. Looks like somebody wanted something forgotten. Outside, the wind quieted suddenly. The depot settled around them with a long wooden sigh. Then, somewhere deep below their feet, a soft ticking sound began. Slow, steady, like an old clock finally remembering time. The ticking continued beneath the floor, soft but deliberate, each measured sound arriving with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time to be noticed. Ethan stayed crouched beside the hidden seam, one hand resting lightly against the old wood while Ranger remained beside him, silent and strangely calm now, as though finding the compartment had settled some question only the dog understood. Outside, snow drifted steadily against the depot windows, turning the valley pale beneath moonlight. The world beyond the station had disappeared into winter silence, leaving only old timber, cold lantern light, and the slow rhythm beneath their feet. Tick, pause, tick. Ethan leaned closer to the keyhole, brushing away another layer of dirt with his sleeve. Rust framed the tiny opening like dried riverbeds, untouched for decades. No obvious handle, no markings. Whoever built it had not wanted visitors. Tomorrow, he murmured again, though curiosity sat heavier inside him now. Sleep could wait. Answers could not. Ranger shifted slightly and lowered himself beside the hidden door, resting his chin across his paws, but never taking his eyes from the floor. Ethan stood and crossed toward the old ticket office where he had seen the strange flicker earlier. Dust covered everything inside. Filing cabinets leaned crooked against warped walls. Shelves sagged beneath forgotten ledgers swollen from years of moisture. A coffee mug still sat near the counter, cracked but somehow still upright, as though the person who left it had only stepped away for a moment and forgotten to come back. Ethan ran his fingers across an old desk drawer and pulled it open. Nothing useful at first. Receipts, station maps, timetables brown with age. Then beneath a stack of papers, he found something unexpected. A leather-bound notebook worn smooth at the corners. Dark green, heavy in his hands. He brushed dust from the cover. Embossed faintly in fading gold letters were two words. Walter Boone. Ethan exhaled quietly. The station manager from the newspaper clipping. He opened the notebook carefully. Most pages were filled with ordinary entries at first. Freight delays, coal shipments, weather conditions, maintenance notes written in careful handwriting shaped by habit and patience. But near the back, the tone changed. The writing grew uneven. Faster. More urgent somehow. December 9th, 1966. They are asking questions again. I told them nothing. December 12th. The clock stopped tonight. 2:17 exactly. I do not think it was an accident. Ethan frowned. Wind brushed softly against the depot walls, carrying a low whistle through loose boards overhead. He turned another page. December 15th. If anything happens, the station must stay closed. Trust the timing, not the men. Ethan read the sentence twice. Something about it unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Before he could continue, Ranger stood abruptly. No bark, no growl, just immediate focus. The dog moved toward the front windows, ears lifted high. Ethan looked up. Through the swirling snow outside, faint headlights rolled slowly into view near the gravel road leading toward the depot. An old truck, rust-colored, moving carefully through drifts before stopping 50 yards away. The engine remained running. No one stepped out immediately. Ethan set the journal down slowly. Ash Hollow had looked empty enough when he arrived that afternoon. No nearby neighbors. No passing traffic. Yet now, close to midnight, someone had driven all the way to a station no one had visited in decades. Ranger stood perfectly still near the doorway, eyes fixed outside. Then, after several long seconds, the truck lights switched off. Darkness returned. But whoever sat inside had not left. The truck remained motionless beneath the falling snow, dark now except for the faint shape of frost gathering along its windshield. Ethan stood near the station window, one hand resting lightly against the old wood frame, while Ranger stayed beside the door, posture calm, but alert in the way only working dogs ever truly mastered. Not anxious. Watching. The kind of stillness that carried intention. Outside, the valley had become a world of silver shadows. Snow softened everything it touched, covering rusted rails and forgotten signs until Ash Hollow looked less like a town abandoned by time and more like somewhere the world had quietly agreed to forget. Ethan waited nearly 10 minutes before the truck door finally opened. A figure stepped out slowly, bundled beneath a heavy canvas coat and wool hat. Older, broad-shouldered despite age. Whoever it was stood still beside the truck for a long moment, staring toward the depot, as if deciding whether memory or caution weighed heavier tonight. Then the person started walking. Boots crunched softly through snow. Ranger gave one low breath through his nose, but did not bark. That alone told Ethan enough. If danger lived in the valley, Ranger would have said so already. 3 careful knocks sounded against the depot door. Not hurried, not nervous either. Ethan opened it halfway. Cold wind slipped between them. The man standing outside looked somewhere near 70, weathered in the way northern winters shaped people over decades. White beard trimmed short, deep lines around steady blue eyes. He smelled faintly of cedar smoke and old engine oil. His gaze moved first to Ethan, then immediately toward Ranger. "Well," the old man said softly, voice roughened by age and cold. "Looks like Boone finally found somebody stubborn enough to come back." Ethan frowned. "You know this place?" The man let out a quiet breath that might have been laughter. "Better question is why the place knows you." Before Ethan could answer, the old man stepped carefully inside, removing snow from his boots near the entrance without needing permission, like someone who had walked through those doors many years ago. "Name is Walter Finch," he said. "Ran maintenance here back when trains still mattered around these parts." His eyes drifted toward the frozen clock overhead. 2:17. The old man's expression changed slightly. Sadness maybe. Familiarity. "Still stuck there," he murmured quietly. Some things never moved on. Ethan studied him carefully. Military habit lingered even years after service. Read posture. Read hands. Read silences. Walter looked tired but honest. The kind of man who had learned to speak carefully because too much truth often cost people more than lies. Ranger approached slowly and sat beside the old man without hesitation. Walter smiled faintly, scratching behind the dog's ear once. "Smart one," he said. "German shepherds always knew things before the rest of us caught up." Ethan folded his arms. "You said Boone found somebody stubborn enough to come back. What does that mean?" Walter glanced toward the ticket office, toward the floor beneath the photographs where Hiddenwood rested quietly in shadow. The ticking below had stopped again. "Means," the old man said after a pause, "you probably heard the whistle tonight." Ethan said nothing. Walter nodded slowly anyway. "Thought so." Wind sighed softly through the depot rafters while snow tapped the windows like careful fingers. The old man lowered himself onto a bench near the lantern and looked toward the hidden part of the station with the expression of someone staring at a wound time never fully closed. "Listen," he said quietly, voice gentler now. "If Ranger found the hatch already, then you are further in than most people ever got." Ethan froze. He had told no one about the hidden floor, had not mentioned the keyhole, had barely understood it himself. Yet somehow Walter already knew exactly where the dog had been scratching. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Snow whispered softly against the station windows while the lantern flame shifted in quiet drafts moving through old timber walls. Ranger remained seated beside Walter Finch, calm now, almost strangely familiar with the old man, as though some silent understanding had already passed between them. Ethan had learned to trust the dog's instincts long ago. Ranger never settled near someone without reason. Still, trust and answers were not always the same thing. "How do you know about the hatch?" Ethan finally asked, voice measured. Walter rested both weathered hands against the head of his cane, studying the floorboards near the waiting area without looking surprised by the question. "Because I helped hide it," he said quietly. The words settled into the room heavier than the cold. Ethan glanced instinctively toward the hidden seam beneath the bench. Ranger lifted his head slightly, but stayed still. Somewhere above them, the old depot shifted with a soft creak, timber remembering winter after too many forgotten seasons. Walter exhaled slowly. 1966, he said, eyes drifting toward the frozen clock overhead. Ash Hollow was supposed to disappear. Railroad companies were shutting lines down everywhere. Folks moved away. Stores closed. Farms struggled. But none of that was what scared Walter Boone. Ethan leaned against the wall near the ticket office, arms crossed. The old station manager's journal sat nearby on the desk, waiting quietly beneath lantern light. Walter continued. Boone was not afraid of empty trains or bad winters. He was afraid of men with money who came asking strange questions. Men who wanted records, property files, old land deeds. Wind moved softly through the rafters, carrying the faint scent of cedar and snow deeper into the station. Outside, the rust-colored truck sat half buried beneath fresh snowfall, nearly erased by weather already. This valley, Walter continued, used to belong to railroad families, homesteaders, folks who trusted paper promises made 50 years earlier. Then suddenly, documents started disappearing. Land changed hands. Farms were lost overnight. People blamed banks. Taxes. Hard luck. But Boone believed somebody had buried the truth. Ethan frowned slightly. And the hatch. Walter nodded once. The station had storage underneath. Built before the war. Boone used it to hide records. Said if the wrong people ever came looking, at least somebody honest might find the truth someday. Ranger stood then and walked quietly toward the hidden compartment again, nose lowering toward the floorboards. One deliberate sniff. Then another. Ethan noticed something he had missed before. The ticking had returned. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost like an old mechanism buried somewhere below was still trying to keep time after 60 years underground. Walter followed Ethan's gaze. "You hear that?" he asked quietly. Ethan nodded once. "Started tonight." The old man's expression shifted. Not fear exactly. Recognition. "That means something changed," he said softly. "Last time I heard ticking beneath this station." He stopped, eyes drifting toward the clock again. 2:17. Frozen forever. That was the night Boone disappeared. Silence settled between them. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Ethan looked toward the station manager's journal again. December 15th. Trust the timing, not the men. He had dismissed the sentence earlier as paranoia from an old man under stress. Now it felt different somehow. Deliberate. Like instructions. Ranger scratched lightly against the hidden seam once more, then sat back, ears raised. Waiting. Ethan crouched near the keyhole, running his hand carefully across the rusted edge. No handle. No visible latch. Just old wood and forgotten secrets sleeping beneath winter dust. "If you helped hide this place," Ethan said quietly without looking up, "then tell me something." Walter met his eyes. What exactly did Walter Boone think was important enough to disappear over? The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached slowly into the pocket of his coat and placed something small and tarnished onto the floor beside Ethan. A brass key, darkened with age. On its handle, barely visible beneath rust, were two numbers engraved side by side. 2:17. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The brass key sat in Ethan's palm heavier than something so small had any right to feel, cold from decades spent hidden away from daylight. Ranger lowered himself beside the hidden compartment again, tail resting still against the floorboards, though his ears remained high and attentive. The ticking beneath the station had grown steadier now. Soft, patient, like something old quietly waiting for permission to continue. Snow drifted harder against the windows, coating the valley in silver until even Walter Finch's truck outside had nearly vanished beneath white silence. Ethan turned the key slowly between his fingers, The numbers etched into the metal caught the lantern glow. 2. 17. Why now? He finally asked. Why give this to me? Walter leaned back against the old wooden bench, weathered hands folded loosely over his cane. He looked tired suddenly, the kind of tired that did not come from age alone, but from carrying something too long without knowing who to trust with it. Because you came with him, he said quietly, nodding toward Ranger. Boone trusted dogs more than people by the end. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Walter gave the faintest smile. He used to say dogs never lied about fear. Never lied about kindness either. Ranger looked briefly toward the old man, then back to the hidden floor. Ethan glanced once more at the station journal lying open on the desk nearby. Trust the timing, not the men. He had spent years learning when to act and when to wait. Navy training had taught patience, observation, caution, but something about tonight felt larger than instinct. Too many strange pieces had lined up too perfectly. The whistle, the clock, the hidden hatch, the journal, the old man arriving at midnight as though he had been expecting this exact moment. Ethan crouched beside the floor and carefully inserted the key into the rusted lock. Resistance met him immediately. Years of neglect held tight beneath the mechanism. He stopped. Walter stood slowly. Easy, he said quietly. Do not force old things. They break easier than they used to. Ethan adjusted his grip and turned the key gently. At first, nothing happened. Then somewhere below the floor, metal shifted with a deep mechanical click followed by the sound of gears reluctantly waking after 60 winters underground. Dust trembled softly from ceiling beams. Ranger stood immediately, ears forward. The ticking stopped. Silence settled for one long breath. Then the hidden compartment released with a quiet hiss of trapped air escaping upward through old wood. Ethan slid his fingers beneath the seam and carefully lifted. The hatch opened slower than expected, revealing darkness beneath and the faint scent of cold earth mixed with machine oil and cedar wood aged by time. Lantern light reached only a few feet below before shadow swallowed the rest. Narrow iron steps disappeared into darkness. No tunnel stretching endlessly underground. No obvious vault. Just a small chamber hidden beneath the station floor. Ethan grabbed the lantern and lowered it carefully. Dust floated lazily through the beam like snow trapped indoors. Wooden shelves lined the walls below. A desk. Filing cabinets. A single overhead light hanging silent and dead after decades without power. And in the center of the room sat an old wooden chair facing a desk exactly as someone had left it long ago. Empty. Waiting. Ethan climbed down carefully, boots landing against cold concrete. Ranger followed immediately behind him without hesitation. Walter stayed above near the hatch, quiet now. The room felt untouched by time in a way that unsettled Ethan more than decay ever could. Everything remained in place. A coffee mug near the desk. A jacket hanging neatly against the wall. A train schedule pinned beneath glass. On the desk itself rested a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age but untouched by dust, placed carefully where anyone entering would immediately see it. Ethan stepped closer. Written across the front in steady handwriting were 6 simple words. If you found this, you are late. The room beneath the station carried a silence different from the world above. Not empty silence. Preserved silence. The kind that settles over places abandoned carefully instead of forgotten. Ethan stood still beneath the lantern glow, the folded note resting in his hand, while Ranger moved slowly through the underground room. Paws soft against concrete, as though he already understood that something sacred lived here once. Dust floated through the beam of light in slow motion, untouched by wind or time. Somewhere overhead, the depot creaked softly beneath winter weather, but down here everything felt strangely still, as if the room had been holding its breath since 1966. Ethan unfolded the paper carefully. The handwriting matched the journal upstairs. Steady, deliberate. Walter Boone's voice seemed to live quietly between every line. If you found this, you are late. But maybe not too late. If the station still stands, then somebody decided memory matters more than profit. That means there is still hope for Ash Hollow. Ethan frowned slightly. Ranger stopped near one of the filing cabinets and looked back toward him, ears raised. The dog had gone strangely quiet again, not tense, simply attentive, as though listening to something too faint for human hearing. Ethan continued reading. They came asking for deeds. They said families forgot what belonged to them. They said old land records disappear all the time, but people do not forget where they buried their fathers. The words settled heavily inside the room. Ethan glanced toward the shelves lining the far wall. Dozens of labeled boxes sat stacked neatly, untouched by moisture or time. Property maps, railroad records, survey logs, handwritten files marked family claims. Walter Finch climbed carefully down the iron stairs behind him, slower this time, carrying another lantern that filled the room with warmer light. The old man looked around as though entering a church after many years away. "Still looks the same," he said softly. "Boone kept things exact." Ethan held up the note. He thought people were stealing land. Walter nodded once. Because they were. The old man moved toward one of the shelves and rested his hand gently against a weathered file box. After the railroad started shutting down, outside investors came looking for mountain land. Timber, water rights, railroad corridors. Small towns like this got swallowed quietly. Folks signed papers they did not understand. Records vanished. Some families lost everything. Ranger suddenly crossed the room toward the old desk near the back wall. His nose paused near a drawer Ethan had not noticed before. One soft scratch. Then he sat back patiently. Ethan opened the drawer carefully. Inside sat an old leather folder tied shut with fading twine. He loosened it slowly. At the top lay a map of Ash Hollow and the surrounding valley, marked carefully in red ink. Names circled, boundaries rewritten. Several properties labeled fraudulent transfer. Ethan's chest tightened slightly when one family name caught his attention immediately. Calloway. He stared harder. Same spelling. Same valley. 40 acres near the river outside town. Claimed lost in 1967 after unpaid taxes. But beside it, written in Boone's handwriting, sat 3 words underlined twice. Ownership never surrendered. Ethan felt something shift quietly inside him. He had never known much about his family before Virginia. His grandfather rarely spoke about Montana except to say winters were hard and people left because they had to. Yet here, buried beneath 60 years of silence, sat proof that maybe leaving had not been a choice at all. Walter stepped closer, reading over Ethan's shoulder. His expression softened immediately. "Well," he said quietly, voice touched with something close to disbelief. "Looks like the station was waiting for you after all." Before Ethan could respond, the old overhead light hanging from the ceiling flickered once, then twice. A faint current hummed somewhere in the walls. Ranger stood instantly, ears lifting high toward the darkness near the far corner of the room. Then, from somewhere beyond the concrete wall, hidden deeper underground, came a sound none of them expected. A train bell ringing once. Clear. Hollow. Impossible. The sound lingered in the underground room long after the bell itself had gone quiet, as though the concrete walls had memorized its echo and refused to let it leave. Ethan stood motionless near the desk, the old property map still open in his hands while Ranger faced the far wall with complete attention, ears high and body still in the way only trained dogs ever truly mastered. Walter Finch looked pale suddenly, one hand tightening around the handle of his cane. "That has not happened in years," he said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "Not since before Boone disappeared." The lantern light flickered once overhead, weak electricity humming somewhere unseen beyond the walls like an old machine remembering its purpose. Ethan looked toward the far corner where Ranger stood staring. The wall itself looked ordinary at first. Concrete stained by moisture. Rusted utility pipes running along the ceiling. Dust gathered in corners untouched for decades. Yet something about the sound felt deliberate. Not random settling. Not winter shifting old foundations. A signal. Ranger stepped forward slowly, one careful paw at a time, nose lifting toward the wall near a metal cabinet, half hidden beneath shadows. Ethan followed, boots quiet against concrete. "What is it, boy?" Ranger lowered his head near the cabinet and huffed softly through his nose. Then he looked back once at Ethan, waiting. Ethan moved the cabinet carefully aside. Metal scraped softly against the floor, revealing something unexpected behind it. Another door. Narrow. Steel reinforced. Almost invisible beneath years of dust and faded paint. No handle this time. Just an old mechanical panel beside it with numbers worn nearly smooth by time. Walter stared at it for several long seconds before quietly sitting down in the old wooden chair near the desk. "Boone never told me about this part," he admitted softly. "I thought the records room was all there was." Ethan examined the panel. For numbers. Rust gathered around the edges. Below them, nearly impossible to see beneath age, someone had scratched faint writing into the metal. Timing matters. Ethan frowned. His eyes drifted instinctively toward the station clock above them, though from underground only memory held its image now. 2:17. Ranger sat beside the panel and rested one paw gently near the bottom corner, as if trying to point something out. Ethan looked closer. Beneath the dust sat a tiny brass plate engraved with 4 spaces. Underscore. A time, not a code. A clock setting. He felt something click quietly into place inside his mind. Walter Boone's journal. The frozen clock. The brass key. Trust the timing, not the men. Ethan pressed the numbers carefully. 2, 1, 7. Nothing happened. He paused. Ranger gave a soft breath and tilted his head slightly. Ethan looked again. 2:17. Not numbers. Time. He pressed the sequence slowly. 0, 2, 1, 7. For one long second, nothing happened at all. Then deep within the wall came a low mechanical sound followed by gears shifting somewhere hidden beneath concrete. Dust trembled softly from overhead beams. Walter straightened immediately in his chair. The steel door unlocked with a quiet metallic release. Cold air slipped through the opening carrying a scent older than dust. Cedar wood, machine oil, and something faintly familiar Ethan could not immediately place. Like rain touching railroad tracks after a long summer drought. Ranger stood before the opening but did not enter. Instead, he glanced back toward Ethan, waiting for permission. Ethan pushed the door wider. Beyond it stretched a narrow corridor lined with old wiring and dim emergency bulbs that flickered weakly to life one after another farther into the darkness, as though someone unseen had just switched them on after 60 years. At the far end, barely visible beneath trembling amber light, stood what looked impossibly out of place beneath an abandoned train station. Another train platform, smaller, hidden, and resting silently beside it on forgotten rails sat a single railcar untouched by time. The underground platform felt impossible in the way forgotten things sometimes do, as though time had stepped aside and quietly refused to touch it. Ethan stood at the threshold of the narrow corridor, lantern raised slightly, while Ranger moved one careful step ahead, ears high and body alert but calm. Behind them, Walter Finch remained near the hidden records room, too stunned to follow immediately. The old man simply stared toward the underground railcar with the expression of someone looking into a memory he had never known existed. Weak amber lights flickered overhead in uneven intervals, buzzing softly as though ancient wires were struggling to remember their purpose. Dust floated through the corridor in slow spirals. The air carried an odd warmth compared to the frozen station above, faintly scented with cedar and machine oil preserved beneath stone for generations. Ethan moved forward carefully. The platform stretched perhaps 50 feet before ending near the railcar resting silently on forgotten tracks. It looked older than anything he had seen upstairs, polished wood sides still gleaming faintly beneath layers of dust. Brass details caught the weak light in quiet flashes. No graffiti, no damage, no signs of looting. It had not been abandoned carelessly. It had been hidden. Ranger stopped halfway down the platform and looked back once at Ethan before continuing toward the train car door. His movements remained steady, purposeful, as though instinct had already decided this place belonged to safety rather than danger. Ethan could not explain why, but that alone eased something inside him. He had trusted Ranger with his life before, more than once. At the railcar entrance, faded gold letters curved across dark wood near the door. A.S.H. Special Archive Transport. Ethan brushed snow dust and grime from the lettering with his sleeve. Archive Transport. Walter Boone had not simply hidden papers underground. He had built a way to move them, quietly, secretly, out of reach. Dear Lord, Walter whispered from farther back, finally stepping onto the platform. His voice echoed softly through concrete. Boone really thought they would come for everything. Ethan tested the railcar door carefully. Locked. Old but solid. Ranger stood beside it, nose brushing near the lower edge. Then the dog froze. One slow breath. Ears twitching. Ethan immediately recognized the change. Not fear. Recognition again. Ranger shifted his paw once against the floor near the railcar step. A soft metallic sound answered beneath it. Ethan crouched. Hidden beside the tracks, nearly invisible beneath grime, sat another small brass mechanism attached to the platform. For slots, like a switch. And beside it, scratched faintly into the metal, a sentence worn by time but still readable. What belongs to the valley belongs to its people. Ethan glanced toward Walter. The old man looked pale now, eyes wet with something deeper than surprise. You know what this means? Walter asked quietly. Boone was never hiding treasure. Ethan looked toward the rows of underground shelves beyond the corridor, the maps, the deeds, the names buried beneath decades of silence. No, Ethan said softly. He was hiding proof. Somewhere above them, faintly through layers of concrete and frozen earth, wind moved across Ash Hollow with a long, low sigh. Ethan thought about the Callaway property marked on Boone's map. Ownership never surrendered. How many families had lost homes because truth disappeared quietly? How many stories had simply been rewritten by people with enough money to make forgetting easier? Ranger gave one sharp bark. Not alarm. Urgency. Ethan looked back toward the railcar door. Something had changed. A soft click echoed from inside. Then, slowly, almost impossibly, a warm golden light flickered to life behind one of the frosted windows as though someone inside had just lit a lamp and quietly remembered they had been waiting. The warm light inside the railcar held steady now, glowing softly through frosted glass like a lantern left burning by someone who had only stepped away for a moment. Ethan stood motionless near the platform edge, lantern hanging quietly at his side, while Ranger remained planted beside the door, gaze fixed forward and body perfectly still. The underground station had changed somehow. It no longer felt abandoned. It felt awake. Walter Finch stopped several feet behind them, breath slow and uneven. That light should not work, he said quietly. Nothing down here has had power since 1966. Yet the glow remained. Warm, gentle, impossible to ignore. Ethan crouched beside the brass mechanism near the platform again, studying the worn slots beneath the scratched sentence. What belongs to the valley belongs to its people. His fingers brushed along the edges until something clicked softly beneath the dust. A hidden latch. He pressed carefully. Metal shifted with surprising ease. The mechanism folded outward, revealing a narrow compartment inside. Resting there lay another brass key, smaller than the first, polished strangely bright despite the years. Attached to it by thin wire hung a faded paper tag. For the one who listens. Ethan looked instinctively toward Ranger. The German shepherd blinked once, tail moving slowly against the platform floor as though acknowledging something too simple to explain. Ethan stepped toward the railcar door and tested the lock again. This time the key slid smoothly into place. One careful turn. A deep metallic click echoed through the underground chamber. The door released with a long wooden sigh. Warm air drifted outward carrying scents that did not belong beneath frozen earth. Cedar wood. Coffee long faded into memory. Old paper. Something unexpectedly familiar settled quietly inside Ethan's chest. Home. Not his own exactly, but the shape of one. Ranger entered first, paused silent against polished flooring untouched by dust. Ethan followed slowly. Inside, the railcar looked less like transportation and more like a traveling office built for secrets too important to leave behind. Shelves lined the walls filled with maps, sealed carefully inside waxed folders. Filing cabinets stood strapped into place beside narrow wooden benches. A small cast iron stove sat near the far end, cold now, but perfectly preserved. And near the center of the car rested a desk illuminated by a single oil lamp somehow still burning softly, its golden light trembling against polished brass. Walter stepped inside behind them and stopped completely. Boone, he whispered. Good Lord. On the desk sat a leather binder larger than any Ethan had seen upstairs. Thick, carefully labeled. Property restoration records. Beside it lay a second note folded neatly in familiar handwriting. Ethan opened it slowly. If you are reading this, then the station chose correctly. Men came offering money to bury what they stole. Some accepted. Some stayed silent. But truth survives in quiet places if somebody kind enough comes back for it. Inside these records are every deed, every forgery, every family they pushed aside. Do not sell this station. Do not trust men who rush kindness. And if the dog brought you here, trust him. He knows before people do. Ethan glanced toward Ranger instinctively. The dog sat quietly near the stove, calm now, almost peaceful, as if the search had ended long before Ethan realized what they had truly found. Walter wiped quietly at his eyes and looked around the railcar with wonder softened by grief. People lost homes because of lies, he said quietly. Entire families left this valley believing they had no choice. Ethan opened the binder slowly. Page after page revealed names. Surveys. Forged transfers. False tax claims. Entire histories buried beneath signatures no one had questioned for 60 years. Then halfway through, one page stopped him cold. Callaway Family Land Restoration Claim. Approved, but never delivered. Attached beneath it sat an envelope unopened since 1966, with one sentence written across the front in Walter Boone's careful hand. For Ethan Callaway, if he ever finds his way home. Morning arrived slowly over Ash Hollow. Pale winter light stretching across the valley, like something cautious returning after a long absence. Snow covered the depot roof in soft silence, smoothing old scars and broken edges beneath clean white stillness. From the outside, nothing looked different. The abandoned station still leaned against the cold as though forgotten by history. Rust still traced the rails. Wind still wandered through the valley carrying the scent of pine and distant mountains. Yet beneath the station, everything had changed. Ethan had not slept much. Somewhere between the unopened envelope bearing his name and the thousands of buried records inside Walter Boone's hidden railcar, exhaustion had quietly stepped aside for something stranger. Purpose, the kind he had not felt in years. Ranger slept near the old cast iron stove inside the underground railcar, paws twitching occasionally as if chasing distant sounds through dreams only dogs understood. Walter Finch sat nearby with a mug of coffee warmed over a portable burner, his weathered hands wrapped around it carefully. Neither man had spoken much through the night. Some discoveries arrived too large for immediate words. Ethan stood near the station platform above ground now, staring toward the frozen valley while holding the envelope Boone left behind. Frost clung lightly to the paper edges, though the handwriting remained steady after 60 years. For Ethan Callaway, if he ever finds his way home. He opened it slowly. Inside rested a folded deed, several photographs, and one handwritten letter. The first photograph stopped him immediately. A younger man stood smiling beside railroad tracks near a riverbank, dark hair pushed back by mountain wind. Beside him stood a little boy no older than 7 holding the leash of a German shepherd. On the back, written carefully in fading ink, sat 4 words. Your grandfather loved this place. Ethan swallowed quietly. He had never seen the picture before. Never heard anyone mention the land in Montana. Never knew his family had once belonged somewhere beyond military bases and temporary addresses. The letter trembled slightly in his hand as he unfolded it. If this reaches a Callaway one day, know this. Your family never abandoned the valley. They were pushed from it quietly by men who counted land more valuable than memory. I tried to fix what I could. The records remain below. What belongs to your people belongs to them still. Do not let kindness leave this station. It has already survived too much loneliness. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. Wind moved gently across the tracks, carrying the distant sound of tree branches shifting under fresh snow. For the first time in years, the silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt alive somehow, like the valley had been waiting patiently for somebody to finally listen. Weeks passed quietly after that. Lawyers arrived. Historians. County officials who once dismissed Ash Hollow suddenly found themselves staring at 60 years of evidence too complete to ignore. Families began receiving letters. Forgotten land restored. False transfers reversed. Old names returned to places they had disappeared from decades earlier. The story spread farther than anyone expected, though Ethan never cared much for attention. He stayed because leaving no longer felt right. By spring, the old depot had changed. Fresh paint covered weathered boards. Warm lights glowed inside each evening. A small coffee counter welcomed travelers passing through the valley. Local families gathered near restored benches where silence once lived alone. Walter Finch became unofficial historian of the station, telling stories no one had asked to hear for too many years. Ranger, meanwhile, claimed ownership of the front entrance entirely, greeting visitors with quiet dignity and occasionally wandering